Alexander Whitman was one of the wealthiest tech entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley, a man whose arrogance matched his billion-dollar fortune. Living alone in his sprawling Beverly Hills mansion, he treated his household staff like invisible servants, but reserved his cruelest treatment for Grace Johnson, a 45-year-old black woman who had been his housekeeper for 3 years. Every single morning, Alexander would find new reasons to belittle Grace with calculated cruelty. He criticized her cleaning methods, complained about her cooking, and made condescending remarks about her appearance and intelligence. "Maybe if you actually went to school, you'd know how to properly dust my awards," he would sneer while she silently continued her work. But what Alexander didn't realize was that Grace was hiding a secret so shocking that it would completely shatter his world. Alexander's daily routine of humiliation had become almost ritualistic. He would time Grace's work, criticize her techniques, and mock her quiet demeanor. "I don't pay you to think, just clean," he would say coldly. Other staff members whispered that Grace was different from previous housekeepers. She had an unusual way of moving, an unexplained confidence in her posture, and sometimes they caught her reading medical journals during her breaks. But nobody, especially not Alexander, bothered to ask why. What Alexander didn't know was that Grace had been watching him carefully for months, noticing troubling changes in his behavior and health that even his personal physician had missed. She observed how he clutched his chest during stressful phone calls, how he secretly took medication when he thought no one was looking, and how his face would turn pale during particularly intense business meetings. Her trained eye caught symptoms that others dismissed as stress. Grace had tried subtly suggesting that Alexander see a doctor, mentioning that he seemed tired or asking if he was feeling well. But Alexander interpreted her concern as insolence. "Mind your own business and stick to cleaning," he would snap. "I don't need health advice from someone who scrubs toilets for a living." Each rejection stung Grace deeply, not because of his rudeness, but because she recognized the warning signs of something far more serious than Alexander could imagine. The tension in the household had been building for weeks. Alexander's business empire was facing unprecedented challenges, with several major deals falling through and competitors gaining ground. His stress levels were through the roof, and he was taking his frustration out on everyone around him, but especially on Grace. The other staff members had learned to avoid him during his explosive outbursts, but Grace continued her work with quiet dignity, even as his insults became more vicious and personal. One particularly stressful Tuesday morning, Alexander was screaming at his business partners over the phone about a failed merger that had cost him millions. The veins in his neck were bulging as he paced around his home office, his face turning red with rage. Grace was quietly organizing his bookshelf nearby when she noticed his breathing becoming labored and erratic. She had seen these exact symptoms before, and her heart raced as she realized what was about to happen. "You incompetent fools," Alexander shouted into the phone. "This deal was supposed to be foolproof. Now I'm down $50 million because of your stupidity." But as the words left his mouth, Alexander felt a crushing pain in his chest unlike anything he had ever experienced. The sensation was so intense that it felt like someone had placed a massive weight on his ribcage. Suddenly, Alexander dropped the phone and grabbed his chest, his eyes wide with terror as sharp pain shot through his entire body like lightning. He tried to call for help, but his voice came out as barely a whisper. His legs gave out beneath him, and as he collapsed to the floor, gasping for air and feeling his heart racing wildly out of control, Grace immediately sprang into action. Without a moment's hesitation, Grace dropped her cleaning supplies and rushed to Alexander's side. But what happened next would have shocked anyone who had witnessed Alexander's daily treatment of her. Grace's entire demeanor changed in an instant. Her hands moved with practiced precision as she quickly assessed his condition, recognizing the classic symptoms of a massive heart attack. Her movements were confident, professional, and remarkably skilled. "Stay with me, Mr. Whitman," Grace said calmly as she worked to save his life. "I'm going to call for an ambulance, but I need you to keep breathing." She loosened his tie with expert efficiency, positioned him properly to maintain blood flow, and began performing CPR with a level of skill that seemed impossible for a housekeeper to possess. As Grace worked to keep him alive, Alexander's mind raced with confusion even through his pain. How did she know exactly what to do? Why were her hands so steady and sure? Why was she speaking to the 911 dispatcher using medical terminology that sounded like a foreign language to him? Through his haze of pain and fear, Alexander began to realize that nothing about this situation made sense. When the paramedics arrived, Grace provided them with detailed information about Alexander's condition, his medications, and his medical history that she had carefully observed over the years. She spoke to them as an equal, using complex medical terms and giving precise descriptions of his symptoms. The paramedics clearly respected her knowledge and followed her recommendations without question. Patient is a 52-year-old male presenting with acute myocardial infarction, Grace reported professionally. He's been experiencing chest pain for approximately 8 minutes. I've administered CPR and maintained his airway. His pulse is weak but present, and his breathing is shallow but steady. Alexander stared at her in complete bewilderment. Who is this woman who had been cleaning his house for 3 years? At the hospital, as Alexander slowly recovered from his life-threatening heart attack, he couldn't stop thinking about Grace's mysterious transformation. The doctors told him that without her immediate intervention and medical knowledge, he would have died on his office floor within minutes. But what puzzled him most was how his uneducated housekeeper had demonstrated such advanced medical expertise that even impressed the emergency room physicians. The mystery deepened when Alexander overheard 2 doctors discussing his case in the hallway. That woman who brought him in knew exactly what she was doing, one said. Her initial assessment was perfect, and her CPR technique was flawless. She must have medical training. The other doctor nodded in agreement. She saved his life, no question about it. Professional grade work. When Grace came to visit him the next day, Alexander finally asked the question that had been haunting him. How did you know exactly what to do? Where did you learn those medical procedures? Grace looked at him with the same quiet dignity she had always maintained, and for the first time in 3 years, she decided to tell him the truth about who she really was. Mr. Whitman, Grace said softly, I spent 12 years as a cardiac surgeon at Johns Hopkins Hospital. I saved hundreds of lives before I had to leave my practice. Alexander's mouth fell open in shock as she continued her story. My husband was diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's disease when he was only 49 years old, and I made the decision to care for him myself rather than put him in a facility. Grace explained that she had given up her prestigious medical career and taken housekeeping jobs to have flexible schedules that allowed her to care for her husband during his final years. I needed work that would let me be home with him in the evenings and weekends. Housekeeping provided that flexibility, even though it meant enduring people's assumptions about my intelligence and worth. Alexander felt a wave of shame wash over him as he realized the magnitude of his cruelty. Here was a woman who had sacrificed everything to care for her beloved husband, a brilliant surgeon who had chosen love over prestige, and he had spent 3 years treating her like she was worthless. The irony wasn't lost on him that the same hands he had mocked for not knowing how to clean properly were the skilled surgeon's hands that had saved his life. My husband passed away 6 months ago, Grace continued, her voice trembling slightly. I've been trying to decide whether to return to medicine or continue with domestic work. Your attitude toward me made me question whether I belonged in either world. Alexander could see the pain in her eyes, pain that he had contributed to with his daily cruelty and dismissive treatment. From that moment forward, Alexander's entire perspective on life changed dramatically. He realized that his wealth and success meant nothing if he used them to hurt and degrade others. He had been so blinded by his own arrogance that he had failed to see the extraordinary person who had been working in his home every day. Alexander immediately offered to help Grace return to her medical practice, providing funding for her to update her certifications and offering to use his business connections to help her find a position at the finest hospitals in the country. But more importantly, he began the difficult process of examining his own behavior and making amends for the pain he had caused. Grace eventually returned to practicing medicine, becoming the head of cardiology at a prestigious Los Angeles hospital. Alexander not only supported her career transition, but also became one of her first patients, entrusting his ongoing heart care to the woman whose skill and compassion had given him a second chance at life. The experience taught Alexander that true wealth isn't measured in bank accounts or business achievements, but in how we treat others and the impact we have on their lives. He learned that every person has a story, dignity, and worth that deserves respect, regardless of their current circumstances or the job they perform. Today, Alexander uses his fortune to fund scholarships for medical students and support programs that help healthcare workers transition back into practice after caring for family members. On his office wall hangs a photo of Grace in her surgical scrubs, with a plaque that reads, "Dr. Grace Johnson, the woman who saved my life and taught me how to live." This incredible story reminds us that we never truly know the people around us or the sacrifices they've made. I'm curious, where are you watching this powerful story from right now? Are you from the United States, Canada, the UK, Australia, or somewhere else entirely? Share your location in the comments below. If this story about second chances and hidden heroes moved your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel, because we have so many more inspiring true stories that will remind you never to judge someone by their current circumstances.